B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's the day after the election, Wednesday, November 4th, 2020.
Don't wanna be an American idiot. Don't want a nation under the new media. Hey, can you hear the sound of hysteria? They saw subliminal mindfuck America.
It is a mindfuck, America. And I have to acknowledge that I am reeling here on the day after our official election occurred. And we don't have the final results. It does appear that Joe Biden still may prevail in the race for president. But as I survey the electoral maps of America, it's beyond depressing. Really, my emotion is despair. When I was up late last night, I anchored some local election coverage here, got home a little after 11 California time, and I was up late enough to watch Trump declare victory, falsely. But as I survey the situation and look at these maps that are just loaded with red ink, the despair that I feel is that America is lost to a con man who has seduced nearly half of the country into his brand of authoritarianism, thumbing his nose at the previous standards and gentle person's agreements about what America is and how we operate. And the reverse projection, the lies that he so frequently employs to paint himself as this innocent victim and point the finger at his opponents as the cause of the very chaos that he has intentionally produced. And in the states that are reddest, the correlation is with the highest caseload of coronavirus right now. It's not one for one, but you get the point. The states where it looked like the Senate might flip are high COVID states in many cases. Members of the Trump cult made it to the polls or used absentee ballots, but made clear that they will not hold Trump's enablers responsible for anything. They are egging them on to do more, to dismantle what is left of the good parts of our government, and to take a jackhammer to many of the foundations of our system. And they do it with glee because they're owning the libs. And I've been talking about this quite a bit lately. What most people who share my views aren't aware of is that we are demonized on a daily basis in the conservative media that dominates the minds of these idiots. They're told not just that we're the other team that has to be taken on and defeated in a sporting way. No, we are the dangerous libtards who they have been trained to fear and to seek and destroy. And I have my fingers crossed. You know, I'm not a Biden fan, and I didn't vote for him. I didn't have to here in California. But I certainly want Trump to be defeated. At least part of the national nightmare will come to an end. And it's not certain how this will turn out, because Biden may end up with 270 to 275 electoral college votes. And Trump and his legal team, and don't count out Bill Barr over there at Trump and Justice law firm, With his freshly packed Supreme Court, Trump doesn't even have a cause of action to take to the Supremes, but when he spoke in the wee hours of this morning, that was his threat. I'm going to the Supreme Court. And we can rely on John Roberts, all of the right-wingers, including the fresh face of Amy Coney Barrett, to discover some originalist way to justify the irrational legal claims that Trump will try to press. And so, even if the numbers come out in Biden's favor, Trump will try to find a way to unravel them. And the playing field is not level. It is tilted far to the right. And we must be patient. It's not easy. I feel anger. I feel stress. I feel this deep unease that a nation that I've loved and tried to move in a leftward direction for years is telling me to fuck off and go away. I'm not an American. I'm not a patriot because I'm not a conservative who wants to dismantle major elements of our government and manipulate the others in favor of this extremist view. So as I look at the picture, I have a couple of broad comments to make, and then we'll dive into the election news that's available today. As you know, I believe that the Democrats once again ran a deeply flawed candidate with loads of baggage. And Joe Biden has too much history. He was an easy target in many ways for Trump. And the Democrats squandered a lot of time and resources in Texas and in Florida. And I thought Florida might turn out better, but I didn't expect it to go Democratic. And I never had any inkling that Texas was flippable for the Democrats. And Barack Obama hit the scene way too late. I don't know why he waited. But 50 or 60 million people had already voted before Obama surfaced and made some pretty decent hits on Trump. And I have my issues with Barack Obama, but in this pitched battle, he is the enemy of my enemy, and I'll take him as a fairly effective leader of the Democratic Party. I also believe that the Biden campaign bet too much on courting African Americans, particularly at the expense of Latinos. And it's not just the Cuban exile community in Miami that delivered big for Trump in South Florida. 4 years ago, he lost Miami-Dade by 30 percentage points to Hillary Clinton. And this time, his vote totals increased from 334,000 to 500,000. And I think the Latinos are Biden's equivalent of Hillary ignoring Michigan and Wisconsin in 2016. But the other big picture is really an indictment of a broad cross-section of the American people. They've been trained by Fox and other media that they consume to believe that government is fundamentally bad, if not evil, except when it's used to wage wars in Muslim nations. And so the efforts to dismantle environmental regulations despite the threat that is posed by climate change, the efforts to promote law and order, while our political leaders, particularly those named Trump, just trample on the law. It doesn't apply to them. Their greed, their cons, their grifts, all that's okay because they're Trumps. And, of course, if Hunter Biden does it, hell has to pay. And it gets beyond, inconsistencies and incongruities. We are dealing with people who claim to be super patriots who are destroying the very fabric of our society. The idea that those people can go to mob rallies, be left out in the cold because Trump stiffed the bus drivers, expose themselves to COVID. The Stanford study recently says an estimated 700 people have died who went to Trump rallies, 30,000 cases. And I fear for what comes next, because the failure of Democrats to pick up enough seats in the Senate to control it, at least that's the way it looks right now. It appears Mitch McConnell not only won re-election in Kentucky, but he will continue as the Senate Majority Leader. And assuming Biden ekes out an ultimate win, Mitch McConnell will be there, as he did with Obama, to obstruct every step of the way. And it's just so confounding to see how many people buy into the bullshit and think that their lives are going to be better, or that the state of our nation will be better by continuing the idiocy of Trumpism. So it was in the wee hours of the morning, I believe it was about 2 a.m. or 2:30 Washington time, when Trump appeared in the White House. And there were some 400 people who'd been there for a victory party. And he had a Marine band or some band that played him onto the stage. And it didn't take him long to get to the point that he is a victim. That, quote, frankly, we did win this election. And he rambled through a teleprompter script with a lot of election numbers that had been cherry-picked to make it look like Trump was way ahead. And he was ahead in Pennsylvania, for example, by almost 8 points. But that lead has dwindled. And in the interim, Wisconsin has been declared for Biden. Michigan appears to be on the verge of being called for Biden. We're going to check the very latest numbers for you here in a moment. And he made this empty threat. We'll be going to the Supreme Court, and we want all voting to stop. Now, he can't order voting to stop. The voting already took place. It's the tabulation of those votes that he wants to stop on a selective basis. Oh, he wants the counting to continue in Arizona because he thinks that will redound to his favor. But he wants it stopped in Pennsylvania while he still has a lead. And he convinces himself, I suppose, that his irrational thinking is rational and will be viewed as rational if he puts it in front of the Supreme Court. And his repeated comment was, as he rattled off these numbers, that Biden can't catch us. Oh, can't catch us here, can't catch us there. But that's a lot of wishful thinking, or at least positive projection on his part. So Biden didn't take my advice and come out and declare victory before Trump did. And it actually, I respect that he operates on some level of principle and wouldn't attempt to do that. But as I said yesterday in my lead comments on the podcast, whoever declares first that I'm the winner has convinced his supporters that he is the winner, and then it's a game by the other side. And Trump appeared so determined to do this that he tripped over some of his own potential legal processes that he hopes to resort to. But here's what Joe Biden said. And by the way, Joe Biden is now one word. When you hear people talk about him on TV. Joe Biden said, as I've said all along, it's not my place or Donald Trump's place to declare who's won this election. That's the decision of the American people. But I'm optimistic about this outcome. It ain't over till every vote is counted. His campaign manager, Jennifer O'Malley Dillon, issued a statement this morning condemning Trump's remarks. The president's statement tonight about trying to shut down the counting of duly cast ballots was outrageous, unprecedented, and incorrect. It will not happen, she said. If the president makes good on his threat to go to court to try to prevent the proper tabulation of votes, we have legal teams standing by, ready to deploy to resist that effort, and they will prevail. But will they? They're operating in hostile legal territory. And what we saw in Florida 2000 was that the Gore post-election team miscalculated. And they thought, well, let's just do partial recounts in the counties in Florida where Democrats do well. And they could not or did not anticipate that that would be the trick that would be used against them. To say, aha, you didn't count all the votes or recount all the votes in Florida, and therefore we are stopping the vote count while Bush is 537 ahead. So there are too many variables here, too many scenarios to try to guess exactly how this will play out. Trump has already demanded a recount in Wisconsin. That doesn't necessarily take a long time, given that all this stuff is stored electronically. They may run the mail-in ballots again. It's not clear to me what exactly constitutes a recount in Wisconsin. But there was a recount in 2016, came out in Trump's favor. So he may hope that I believe it's a 20,000 vote gap in Wisconsin the last time I looked. So fundamentally, Trump needs a legal cause of action in order to get in front of the Supreme Court. And ordinarily, you have to step up the district court to an appeals court before you can get to the Supremes. But Trump has had the best success of any president in my lifetime of claiming emergencies and getting the court to fast track his claims or would-be appeals. So we really can't predict how this will play out. But we know that Trump will be aggressive, that his allies will be further emboldened because of the substantial victory of Republicans. They will continue to lie and use half-truths, innuendo, and concocted information to try to discourage Democrats and throw off their strategies. And once again, we see Facebook and Twitter operating in this lame way. Trump flatly lied in tweets and Facebook posts that he issued just before he spoke to the cameras early this morning. And they didn't block the posts. they tagged them. So here is a spokesperson from Facebook. Once Trump began making premature claims of victory, we started running notifications on Facebook and Instagram that votes are still being counted and a winner is not projected. We're also automatically applying labels to both candidates' posts with this information. So get that. So Trump lies. They say they don't call out the lie. They simply state that votes are still being counted, a winner isn't projected, but they let the post circulate. Both platforms faced criticism for their responses. In late-night posts cross-posted to both Twitter and Facebook, Trump declared, "We are up big, but they are trying to steal the election. We will never let them do it. Votes cannot be cast after the polls are closed." And his next post was, "I will be making a statement tonight, a big win." So Facebook initially labeled the first post with a simple box advising readers to see the latest updates on the 2020 U.S. election. And more than a half hour later, the company updated its warning to note the final results may be different from initial vote counts, as ballot counting will continue for days or weeks. But already 100,000 people had seen it. Twitter restricted distribution on the first post, blocking it from being retweeted or replied to, and appended a note saying the content is disputed and might be misleading about an election or other civic process. So Trump lies, and they tag it. Biden just puts up a post. Let's just stipulate that it's not full of lies. He essentially gets flagged in a similar way. And so I just think that this is untenable. But we're not going to get any regulation from a divided Congress that would have to navigate through a Senate still controlled by Mitch McConnell. And so the use of social media, and even though Trump doesn't think that Fox is fully on his side the way he thinks it used to be, this has really changed the dynamic. And it's not about Russian infiltration of our social media. It's about the way Americans weaponize it against other Americans. And the social media platforms just stand there and say, well, you know, we'll flag it, we'll tag it, but we won't bag it. And as we have been reporting, Facebook adjusted its algorithms beginning in early October. They claim it was an error, but it caused engagement on Facebook to drop dramatically for some of the largest U.S.-based liberal Facebook pages. Again, this doesn't have anything to do with Russia, Macedonia, Iran, China. Nope, it's Americans. And beginning in early October, the pages Occupy Democrats, the other 98%, and Being Liberal. And I consider these to be propaganda sites for the left. But they had over 18 million followers, and they experienced significant declines in their reach. Now, what is really stunning about this is that the slack was picked up by Fox News. And on Facebook and at YouTube, Fox News, which is considered a legitimate and credible news outlet, has gotten more circulation as they move to suppress, they say, you know, Alex Jones and QAnon, Pizzagate adherents. And we now learn that over at YouTube, and I've long criticized this, you play a video, and while you're watching or when it's over, in the right-hand column of the page, there are all these suggestions for the next video you should watch. And YouTube, up through the 2016 election, was delivering edgier and edgier content. So you start off, if we just make up a fake scale about edgy, all right, from 1 to 10, 10 being the edgiest, you're watching some video that's a 1 on the edgy scale. So in the up next column, they'll put things that might be a 3 or a 5. You watch the 5, they feed you a 7. And in the old days, that would include Alex Jones on your second or third view. And once again, the effort to clear up the divisive and misleading or false content on YouTube has led to greater circulation for clips from Fox News. And a spokesman, this is a guy who used to work at YouTube. His name is Chasla. And he said back in 2016, Alex Jones got featured, and now it's Fox News. In several analyses of YouTube's recommendations on popular news and election videos over the last 30 days, Fox News was consistently the most recommended channel, sometimes by a wide margin. And I didn't know this, but I guess this confirms my hunch, because I was describing how the consumers of right-wing content were very much abuzz about the recent revelations about Hunter Biden that were suppressed by the mainstream media. And I believe this may have helped Trump measurably. We won't be able to measure it until later, I suppose. But we have serious structural problems in our political system, in social media, in the election process. Once again, the polling was way off, right? There's so many Democrats who were giddy because of these leads of high single-digit to low double-digit numbers in battleground states. And it didn't pan out. As I've pointed out, some of that is that you cannot poll for voter suppression, voter intimidation, and the behind-the-scenes efforts in election offices to rig the vote. And while the minions of Trump always talk about voter fraud, which is virtually non-existent, we know that is a cover for election fraud. So the claims of vote fraud, voter fraud, are circulating big time. The QAnon candidate for Congress who was elected from Georgia, Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene, she circulated on Twitter a comment by Joe Biden that was taken from a video out of context. He said that Democrats had built the biggest operation to counter election fraud, but the way he said it permitted them to pull a soundbite. What he said was that President Obama's administration before this, we have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics. Now, what he meant was to fight voter fraud, but if you just isolate that one phrase, you can project that it has the opposite meaning. So Trump has put out these misleading tweets. They're finding Biden votes all over the place in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So bad for our country. Another from Trump. They're working hard to make up 500,000 vote advantage in Pennsylvania disappear. And also a tweet from Trump. Last night I was leading, often solidly in many key states, in almost all instances, Democrat run and controlled. Then one by one they started to magically disappear as surprise ballot dumps were counted. Very strange. And the pollsters got it completely and historically wrong. Well, a lot of the vote counting stopped because people had to go to sleep. And nobody expected to, just work straight through until all ballots were counted. That's only what is going on in Trump's imagination. But particularly in Pennsylvania, where he was up by 600,000 votes, Trump was bleating that the Democrats were, operating in a way that was unfair to him. So here's another fake tweet that went out from Michael Kudry, a Republican activist. Breaking. Wisconsin has more votes than people who are registered to vote. Total number of registered voters, 3.1 million. Total number of votes cast, 3.2 million. Well, it's not true. Wisconsin has 3.6 million registered voters, and there were 3.3 million votes that had been counted. But why let the facts get in your way? No, they don't. And Fox News surprised Trump and his allies at the White House last night because the guy who was at the decision desk this time is named Arnon Mishkin. He's been outed as a registered Democrat. And he called Arizona at 11:20 p.m. Eastern Time on election night. And he called it for Biden. I believe about 70%, 73% of the vote had been counted at that point. And Michigan apparently got it right. But it created a big backlash from the White House. Anchors were squirming on the set. They knew that they were being vilified by the Trumpers. So let's take a look. It's now 4 p.m. Pacific time here on November 4th. And I want to give you just a quick update looking at the screen here. The states that have not been called in the presidential race include Pennsylvania, where they expect the first round of vote counting to be completed by late today or tomorrow. And with 86% of the votes counted, it's 51 to 47%. Now, that has narrowed considerably because Biden was at 43% late last night. Then when we look at the next state that hasn't been called yet, North Carolina, Trump is leading 50.1% to 48.7%. It's about 100,000 votes, with 95% of estimated votes reported. And this may not be decided until as late as November 12th, because mail-in ballots in North Carolina that were postmarked by Election Day are accepted for more than a week from now. So we've got to accept that this is not going to be a quick resolution, or at least it's certainly not likely. Now, I've never considered Georgia a likely Democratic victory, largely because of the election games they've been playing there for years. The purging, the suppression, playing games with mail-in ballots during the primary this year. So Georgia is showing 94% of estimated votes reported. Trump is leading 50.0 to 48.8%. And let's see, 358 from 415. It's about 60,000 vote gap there. So it's still apparently within reach. I don't know the exact number of uncounted ballots in Georgia. And we've also seen that the 2 Senate races there are not fully resolved. Doug Collins conceded in the one race, which leaves Kelly Loeffler, the appointed incumbent, facing off against the preacher from the Ebenezer Baptist Church, who performed pretty well. And John Ossoff, the Democrat, is still tangling with David Perdue in Georgia. So that is not yet resolved. Susan Collins has been declared the winner in Maine. And like I said, there is no penalty for people who have been Trump's enablers, even those who have protested a little bit, an itty bit, along the way. So the big pickup for Biden so far today has been Wisconsin, where he is showing a lead by 49.4% to 48.8%. 21,000 roughly is the gap between the two candidates. And by the way, currently, the New York Times is projecting Joe Biden with 253 Electoral College votes out of the needed 270. And Trump hasn't moved from 214 since the early hours of this morning. Then we move to the West, where Doug Kelly did win the Senate seat in Arizona. And Biden is currently has a decent lead over Trump. 86% of the votes have been reported, and Biden leads 51 to 47%. So it's encouraging, but it is not yet decided. Then we look at Nevada, where Biden has a lead, 49.3 to 48.7. And it is about 8,000 votes separating them, with 86% of estimated votes reported. So we have to be prepared that vote counting may be laborious. All of these state officials know that Trump is going to be looking over their shoulder, breathing down their proverbial necks, and so they want to get it right and avoid legal entanglements that could extend for weeks and that could be used to game the system in order for Trump to win a victory at the Supreme Court. So when we then look at the Senate, this is the big disappointment. In Montana, the sitting governor who had run for president, a Democrat, a very moderate one, Steve Bullock, he has lost to Steve Daines. Also, the governorship there went to this Greg Gianforte, who's the one who beat up a reporter after he had been elected to Congress in 2018. And so as you look across this map, the Democrats came up short. In the House races, the Democrats lost a few seats, but Pelosi will remain the Speaker, and the Democrats will remain in control of the lower house. But this was not the blue wave that many people anticipated, and it shows not only the strength of the Trump cult, but the deep weaknesses of the Democratic opposition. And from my left perspective, as a non-member of the Democratic Party, they keep thinking that if they move to the right and embrace all these moderates, Air Force fighter pilots and former Marines, spooks, that they can somehow pass in these red states, Texas, Kentucky. And the sheer amounts of money, it is obscene what the Democrats spent to lose. Jamie Harrison lost by over 10 points to Lindsey Graham. And he was trying to shame Democrats into sending him money as recently as Monday, even though he had nearly $60 million collected just in the last 3 or 4 months. So these are dark moments for the Democratic Party and for everyone who stands against Trump. In Michigan, Biden is leading 49.5% to 48.8%, with 94% of the vote counted. And we're told that the remaining votes are from Detroit and Flint. So now I'm looking at a briefing about the Senate races. I mentioned that Mark Kelly has been declared the winner in Arizona. John Hickenlooper, what a lightweight that guy is, the former governor of Colorado. But he handily defeated Cory Gardner, the Republican one-termer. And so that's a pickup for the Democrats. And the name I was looking for in Georgia is Raphael Warnock. He is the Reverend and Democrat who will be in the runoff against Kelly Loeffler. In Texas, M.J. Hagar, the Air Force pilot, didn't even come close to defeating John Cornyn. And it was Amy McGrath, the military veteran who took on Mitch McConnell with oodles of money, running as a Republican, and it doesn't work. And Tom Tillis beat the sexting Democrat Cal Cunningham in North Carolina. And at this point, Gary Peters, the first-term Democratic senator from Michigan, is holding on, but only by a thread. And in the House, the first-term Democrat from Iowa, Abby Finkenauer, was defeated. Joe Cunningham, South Carolina Democrat, also lost. Now, I want to mention that I interviewed Mo Davis maybe about a month ago. And he's the former Guantanamo prosecutor who has principles, a man I knew when he made public comments supportive of Chelsea Manning. And he lost by 10 points to this 25-year-old kid who has already a very checkered story. He was paralyzed in an accident during spring break that may have involved some partying. And so he rides in a wheelchair. And at the online Republican convention, he did a kind of Jesus stunt where he stood up from his wheelchair to show just how tough he is. But he's also dabbled in Nazi fascination. He's made racist comments. And when he learned that he had defeated Mo Davis, he made a Trumpian comment to the effect that he had owned a lib. Let me see if I can find it here. Oh, it was just a tweet, cry more, comma, lib. So he's another dangerous Republican who will be empowered by his rise to the House of Representatives. And I think he's got a loud mouth that you're going to hear a lot from. And as I looked across the country, it is just so dispiriting to see how outside the urban areas so much is Trump territory. And also, when you get down below the federal races, the blue wave to take back state legislatures and governorships, it's a total flop. And this is so crucial because it's the next 2 years when redistricting will be, gerrymandering will be performed. And it was 10 years ago, in 2010, that the Republicans won 24 chambers, enabling them to draw these maps and create majority rule out of their minority political party. So, the good news is that the Arizona House and Senate have both flipped to the Democrats' control. And I can't recall offhand here if Arizona now has a Democratic governor. I think it's Doug Lucy or something, and it's a Republican. But New Hampshire flipped from the Democrats, both houses, to the Republicans. The Democrats tried to flip the Iowa House, didn't make it, and results in Pennsylvania and Michigan are still pending. Missouri re-elected the Republican incumbent governor, Mike Parson, by 17 points. So it's really hard to take that this country, despite what we've been through, despite the devastating economy and the pandemic, mismanaged incredibly by Trump, that they have more faith in the Republican Party. That says a lot about the Democrats. I want to share some comments here. Tom Friedman's not my favorite columnist, but he occasionally lapses into lucidity. He opens his column today. We still do not know who the winner of the presidential election is, but we do know who is the loser, the United States of America. We've just experienced 4 years of the most divisive and dishonest presidency in American history, which attacked the twin pillars of our democracy, truth and trust. Trump has not spent a single day of his term trying to be president of all the people, and he's broken rules and trashed norms in ways that no president ever dared. Right up to last night when he falsely claimed election fraud and summoned the Supreme Court to step in and stop the voting, as if such a thing were even remotely possible. And he later says if Biden wins, it may be just by a sliver of votes in several key battleground states. Although he'll likely win the popular vote, there will be no landslide, no overwhelming majority telling Trump and those around him that enough was enough. Be gone with you, and never bring that kind of politics of division back to this country again. There's clearly a discomfort, even resistance, Friedman says, among many whites, particularly white working-class males without college degrees, to the fact that our nation is in a steady process of becoming minority white. They see Trump as a bulwark against the social, cultural, and economic implications. And he quotes Rich Lowry of the National Review. Trump is, for better or worse, the foremost symbol of resistance to the overwhelming woke cultural tide that has swept along the media, academia, corporate America, Hollywood, pro sports, and almost everything in between. To put it in blunt terms, he said, for many people he's the only middle finger available to brandish against the people who've assumed they have the whip hand in American culture. Yeah, it's a big flip of the bird, no doubt about it. Kevin Gostola published this comment on Facebook today. He said the Democratic Party, along with liberal celebs, media corporations, and polling firms, did it again. They sold us all the safe and most electable candidate, and they are likely going to lose to Trump again. A deadly virus has ravaged the U.S. Trump and the Republicans failed and flat out refused to pass another stimulus deal ahead of the election that could help working Americans suffering during the pandemic. Both Trump and Republicans prioritized installing a right-wing religious ideologue to the Supreme Court who may further dismantle what we commonly refer to as Obamacare and significantly escalate attacks on abortion rights for women. Yet somehow, with record turnout, Biden and his running mate Harris and all the Democratic operatives could not engineer a commanding victory over Trump. This needs to be the death of the Democratic Party, says Gostola. It is such an embarrassment. Millions entrusted them with saving them from great harm that will be done by a second term of the Trump administration. Let something new and more in touch with humanity rise in its place. I do not have an easy answer to all this, but I look at Bolivia, where the Trump the Trump administration tried to impose a coup regime led by a right-wing religious fanatic. They mobilized against far greater threats and defeated this regime at the polls. We're going to need this kind of action tied to demands directed at politicians in both parties in order to salvage this country. And David Talbot, you may know him as the author of The Devil's Chessboard. He had a different take. Thank you, Joe Biden. Yes, it's far from over, but Biden is on a path to electoral victory. Many of my progressive friends are denouncing Biden as a weak candidate, arguing that the Democratic contender should have wiped the floor with a villainous buffoon like Trump. I understand that argument, says Talbot, but the harsh truth is that Biden was the best candidate we could run against Trump this year. There's no other leader in the crowded 2020 Democratic primary pack, including my choice, Bernie, who could have done better than Biden. All of them would have lost. They couldn't even command a majority of Democratic votes. Well, I'm not so sure about that. But it is water under the bridge, over the dam, and we're all going glug, glug, glug. Now Mitch McConnell wants to be our hero. He said at a press conference today that he has a top priority to pass more economic stimulus. Yeah, maybe 10 cents on the dollar, Mitch. But he did mention additional fiscal support for state and local governments. So maybe he is trying to signal the Democrats that there could be some sort of a compromise that is reachable. But, of course, he blames the Democrats because they passed a bill back in May that he wouldn't touch all summer. And then they claimed that Pelosi was unwilling to compromise. So ballot measures are the people's voice, right? Well, it's true in some cases. In Oregon, they passed the most sweeping drug decriminalization law in America, decriminalizing heroin, cocaine, meth, OxyContin. Possession is no longer a crime, and dealing, or at least possession with the intent to deal, will be treated as a misdemeanor. Oregon also legalized psychedelic mushrooms, which were decriminalized in Washington, D.C. as well. New Jersey, Arizona, Montana, South Dakota each voted to legalize adult use of marijuana, joining 11 other states plus the District of Columbia. And Mississippi legalized cannabis for medical use. It's interesting, the Oregon decriminalization bill featured money from the Drug Policy Alliance, which is funded in part by George Soros, and Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan chipped in $500,000. Here in California, the polls were way off. You may have heard me railing against the special interest ballot measure promoted by Uber and Lyft and some friends, spending over $200 million to rewrite state labor law to their preference. And they succeeded. Just last week, polls showed that it was going to go down to defeat by at least 5 points, but it passed with more than a 15% margin. And what used to be a way for the public to pass legislation has now become a process that is controlled by big money interests who get their way, whether it's fair or not. Oh, and the post office delivered for Trump by not delivering as many as 300,000 mail-in ballots that were in the postal system but had not been scanned for delivery. Judge Emmett Sullivan is hopping mad there in Washington. He ordered them to complete sweeps of postal facilities, particularly in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and Detroit. The judge gave the Postal Service until 3 p.m. Eastern today to complete those sweeps, and the Postal Service this morning said that they had done so, but they only found about 12 or 13 ballots. Okay, well, where are the other 299,000? That's a pretty big bunch of ballots, considering how close the races are in some of these battleground states. So today is November 4th, and for months now, Trump has been predicting that this is the day that COVID would go away. The media would lose interest because, well, it was just a way to make Trump look bad. Well, on Election Day, we saw another 1,130 deaths attributed to COVID reported in the United States, and what is the second highest number of new cases reported, 92,660. And this is what really floors me, because it did appear that COVID was motivating a lot of people to understand what a failure Trump is as a leader. And how he just, left the states on their own, left many Americans on their own. And in recent weeks, he's just been trying to wish it away, changing the subject, doing his COVID rap. And the death continues. And he's not really changing his tune at all. And if he manages to eke out a second term, we will, I think, just be watching tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths, maybe even more than that. So exit polls were very irregular yesterday because they had to tap into people who had voted by mail, try to build models that included them with people who went to the polls. But apart from trying to figure out who was going to win, the exit polls indicate that in more than a dozen states, people were more interested in the economic impact of COVID than the risk of illness or death from it. And this occurs as more than a dozen states shattered records for hospitalization. And a new study showed an unprecedented surge in infections among children. So exit polls rank the state of the economy as a more pressing concern than the pandemic. 4 in 10 voters would prioritize the economy over efforts to limit the spread of the virus. About 1/3 of voters said they were primarily motivated by the economy, especially Trump supporters. Meanwhile, hospitalizations and fatalities are continuing to trend upward. Maine, Minnesota, Idaho, Indiana set new single-day records for infections. In 13 states, record high numbers of hospitalizations. That includes Kansas, Tennessee, Virginia, Oklahoma, Montana, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, Ohio, Nebraska, Minnesota, Indiana, and West Virginia. The chief executive of the University of Iowa Hospitals said, "We are again in danger of losing control of this pandemic in Iowa. Our COVID positivity rates skyrocketed twice before, but this is the first time we've seen rates this high, while also dealing with record hospitalizations." A new study from Europe shows that the infections worldwide came mainly from Europe and not from China. Researchers from the University of Huddersfield claim that Europe was the main cause for the global spread of the virus and not China. The researchers mapped the spread of the virus focusing on 27,000 virus genomes sampled from around the world. And the findings confirm that the virus originated in China and likely jumped into humans from bats. That's what this study shows. And the analysis indicates that it's Europe, not China, which has been the main source for spreading the disease around the world. And amid the new wave in Europe and lockdowns in some countries, even Sweden, which refused to lock down earlier this year, has announced new restrictions. And this report, which comes from Euronews, indicates that Sweden has not yet seen an increase in deaths, even as cases have risen dramatically. But in other European nations, in the United Kingdom, for example, the increase in cases has shown a graphically visible increase in deaths, and November 2nd showed a spike that is a recent high number. In the Czech Republic, the pattern is even more significant, where as the caseload went up, the death rate has increased, especially during the month of October. In Belgium, which we profiled yesterday as one of the most severe nations confronting this second wave, the death rate started to increase around the 11th of October. And similarly in Italy, it was around the 15th of October that the death rate started to climb. The caseload started to increase on about the 6th of October in Italy. And a new study shows that pregnant women with COVID-19 face a higher risk of severe illness and death. This comes from the study at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Although the overall risk of severe illness or death remains low across the board, a study showed that the rate of preterm birth when a baby is born before 37 weeks of pregnancy is 12.9% among women with the virus compared to 10.2% among the general uninfected population. This demonstrates that the infants are at risk. Even if they're not infected, they may be affected. One of the reports, they reviewed data on over 460,000 women between the age of 15 and 44 who tested positive for COVID between January 22nd and October 3rd. They focused only on those who experienced symptoms, not just those with a positive test. And the team adjusted for outside factors, found that pregnant women were more likely to need intensive care at the rate of 10.5 per 1,000, and that compares to 3.9 per 1,000 of women who are not pregnant. And they were also more likely to die, with 1.5 deaths per 1,000 for pregnant women compared to 1.2 for women who are not pregnant. And from North Dakota, we note this election anomaly. David Andal, a Republican, was elected to the North Dakota state legislature yesterday. And unfortunately, he passed away from COVID-19 in October. And this isn't the first time a dead person has been elected to a legislative post. And North Dakota has the highest per capita COVID-19 case rate in the country at 150 cases per 100,000 people. And finally today, we say farewell and happy trails to Robert Fisk, a British-based, I refer to him as an anti-war correspondent. He was a great reporter, but he often volunteered to go to war zones where he wrote critical commentary on the aggressors, the imperialists. And I just want to tell a quick story. This goes back to the, 1980 or so. But Robert Fisk had written an article, and I wanted to interview him. I was working at KGO Radio in San Francisco, the #1 station in town with huge annual revenues, but it was a cheap-ass operation. And so I rang up Robert Fisk in Europe, and I said, hey, can I interview you? And he said, well, yes, will you pay me? And I said, well, you know, the station doesn't have a budget for that. And he said, well, look, it's not about the money, it's about the fact that I'm a professional. And I said, okay, Mr. Fisk, I'll pay you $50 to come on my talk show and provide us commentary. I think it was about something going on in Europe at that point. And he did the interview. He was excellent. And I was pleased to mail him a check on my own account for $50. Now, he was British. He had Irish citizenship. He covered wars for civil and uncivil. I'm sorry, it's written here. Covered wars both civil and resolutely uncivil in the Middle East and beyond. He was somebody who spoke up for the Palestinians, was not afraid to do so. Here's a quote from him from a 2010 speech here in the U.S. I think it is the duty of a foreign correspondent to be neutral and unbiased on the side of those who suffer, whoever they may be. And I love the language of the New York Times. Mr. Fisk was hard on those he deemed the oppressors. Those critics said that he could be unduly harsh. Israel and its treatment of the Palestinians were frequent targets, as were the United States and its misadventures in the Middle East. He could be rough on fellow newsgatherers whom he dismissed as being guilty of hotel journalism. Robert Fisk, outspoken, a great journalist. Happy trails, Mr. Fisk, and thank you for all the great work you did. Thank you for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it everywhere. You'll find it on YouTube, And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.